Hi, good morning. So today's lecture is about change, and things are going to change today. Our relationship is going to change today. So stay tuned. Last time we ended by talking about the different kinds of change. The first approach, the gradual approach, like water wearing down stone, chipping away gradually, slowly, taking our time. The second approach, the acute change, the sledgehammer breaking stone, creating a new pathway, new channel. And the important thing to keep in mind with both forms of changes, with all form of change, lasting change that is, which is what we're about, not just the spike and the return to base level. The thing to keep in mind about change is that neither is quick fix. Even when we pick up that sledgehammer, even when we pick it up, we need to do a lot of work before the preparation. So for example, gradual change, slow change would be doing the gratitude exercise every day. Slowly becoming more and more of a benefit finder. Gradually looking more at the positive. Creating a new neural pathway, neuron by neuron. Remember, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, two very important concepts, because just by knowing, by understanding that our brain changes, that in and of itself makes us more likely to change. And this is work done by Carol Dweck, whom I'll discuss in future courses when we discuss perfectionism. And then the sledgehammer example is like the eureka experience, the great insight that doesn't come in a vacuum. It comes after a lot of hard work, after a lot of preparation. You know, the 99% perspiration that leads to that inspiration. So no quick fix. And the belief in quick fix, the expectation of a quick fix, that is one of the reasons why levels of depression are so high today. Because people are frustrated, they're disappointed, they think that there is something wrong with them when they don't succeed in the quick fix, but I just read in a book that it's possible, that if I do these 5 things, I'll be happy for the rest of my life. And I do these 5 things, and I'm not happier. And then I begin to question myself. No quick fix. It takes time. No 5 easy steps to happiness. Before we go into the change process, there are a few things we need to understand. The first thing to understand is this. Do you really want to change? Do I really want to improve certain things in my personality, things that, or character, or behavior, things that I don't like? And it's not a trivial question. It is not a rhetorical question. Because very often on the conscious level we may be saying yes, but on the subconscious level something is stopping us. Let me show you an example. So this is a study done by Langer and Thompson back in the 80s. And here is what they did. They brought students in, or participants in, and they asked them whether they wanted to get rid of a certain characteristic, like rigidity, or being gullible, or grimness. And they asked them whether they wanted to get rid of these characteristics and whether they succeeded in becoming better in this area. Were you able to introduce change? So were you able to actually become less rigid, if this was important for you to change, or less gullible, or less grim? So this is the first 2 questions that they asked. Did you want to improve on it? Did you want to change this? And the second question, were you successful? And then after they answered these questions, there was a second part to this study, where they asked them to evaluate the following positive characteristics. Consistency. Is it important to you? Is it important to you to be trustworthy? And how important it is for you to be and to be perceived as a serious person. Now here is the interesting finding in this research. Those individuals who rated the positive traits, the ones in yellow, who rated them high as personally important to them, we're less likely to change the negatives. Do you understand the implications of this study? So what it's saying is that, let's say I do want to get rid of rigidity. I don't like being rigid. However, at the same time, consistency is a very important value to me. I'm less likely to change my rigidity because they're associated in my mind. And yeah, I don't want to be rigid, but at the same time, subconscious talking here, I want to be consistent. Don't let go of this rigidity because I couple them, I associate them together. Not wanting to get rid of one because I don't want the baby out with the bathwater. And to me, they're linked. The same with gullibility and trustworthiness. We can say that the other side of gullibility is someone who is trustworthy. Now, going to the extreme, I become gullible. However, I don't get rid of my gullibility because I don't want to also get rid of my trustworthiness. Same with grim. I may be grim, but that's also subconsciously a sign of my seriousness. You know, for years, literally years, when I've been thinking and writing and analyzing the notion of perfectionism, I couldn't understand why it didn't get better for a very long time. Because I knew perfectionism was hurting me. I read the research and I looked through personal experiences. I knew that it was hurting me in terms of my well-being for sure, but also in the long term in terms of my success. And yet I couldn't get rid of perfectionism until I read the study. And I asked myself, okay, so what's the counterpart to perfectionism? What's tied in my mind? What goes hand in hand for me with perfectionism? What goes hand in hand is drive and ambition. Now, if I had to define myself, this is one of the first things that I would define myself as. I'm driven and I'm ambitious. And because I didn't want to lose these characteristics, my subconscious didn't let me, stopped me from getting rid of the perfectionism. Perfectionism, which I define as a debilitating fear of failure. A failure that prevents us, and we'll have a whole week on perfectionism, so we'll get more in depth. You'll understand what it means. And it was only once I understood that for me these two things go hand in hand, I was able to unpack them, to distinguish them, and said, I want to keep one, not the other. Or, for example, worry and anxiety. Again, I've mentioned this many times before. Next time I'll talk to you about the process that I underwent to overcome anxiety. Part of me, since the time I can remember myself, being anxious, whether it's before matches in squash, whether it's before exams, whether it's before speaking up in section when I was an undergrad. And I wanted to stop that. I didn't want that. However, I didn't let go of worry and anxiety because I also saw it with responsibility. Well, if I'm anxious, it means I'm responsible, so I prepare for class much more as opposed to just let go and become a slacker. So I associated a positive trait, which is responsibility. And remember Brandon, no one is coming. Very important trait, responsibility. But that prevented me from letting go, subconscious level, not conscious, of the worry and anxiety that I often experienced. Guilt. Again, there's good guilt, there's bad guilt. You know, it is. Well, I don't want to get rid of guilt because would that mean I'm not being empathic and sensitive toward other people? Very often, we connect the two. They go hand in hand. Another couple is the notion of simplifying. This is something very personal to me. I wanted to do less because I knew that taking on too many activities was actually hurting me, was hurting my productivity, creativity, well-being. I couldn't simplify. Why? Because I associated in my mind with losing my edge. So I didn't let go. Or fault-finding. We talked about this a week ago. Why do people not let go of fault-finding? Why do they remain pessimistic? Because they connect it with a sense of realism. I don't want to stop being realistic. I don't want to be one of those detached Pollyannas, and therefore I don't let go of my fault-finding. Happiness. One of the most significant barriers to people's happiness is that they associate happiness with slacking off. Because the dominant paradigm, the dominant mantra in our culture today is no pain, no gain. And if I'm happy now, i.e. not experiencing pain, it means I'm letting go. It means I'm not going to be successful. It means I'm going to lose my edge. It means I'm going to lose my drive and ambition. So our subconscious prefers to keeps us unhappy so that we don't lose the other things that we value highly. Things such as ambition, things such as having an edge, things such as our hard work. Now, of course, when we look at them, we know that they don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. On the contrary, for example, happiness, we know from the broaden and build theory that positive emotions are actually associated with higher levels of success. Or as I'll talk about after spring break when we talk about perfectionism, we know from research, you'll be able to connect it also in the person, many of you will be able to connect on the personal level. We know that letting go of this fear of failure and coping, putting ourselves on the line more, learning from failures, looking at it as a stepping stone, that contributes to our success in the long term. It doesn't need to take away from our drive and ambition. On the contrary. And the key, if we want to overcome this fear of failure, or the worry and anxiety, or the guilt, or this lack of happiness, is very often, not always, very often about understanding or gaining a better understanding of these characteristics. For example, understanding that I want to let go of my fear of failure, the debilitating fear of failure, not just fear of failure, because everyone is afraid of failing to some extent. But to let go of the debilitating fear of failure and yet maintain my drive and ambition. So a more nuanced understanding. They don't need to go hand in hand. Or I never used to be able to say no to people. Such a short word, such an easy word, so difficult at times to say. Why? Because I see myself and I want other people to see me as empathic, as sensitive, as a nice guy. But then I unpacked the two. And I realized it doesn't have to go hand in. I can say no to people very sensitively. Because very often when I say yes to others, I'm saying no to myself. And in the long term, very often to the relationship. So now I have a better, more nuanced understanding of when I can say no and when I don't want to say no, while maintaining my sensitivity and my empathy, without experiencing the same levels of guilt that I experienced before whenever I said no. And the same you can do for every one of these characteristics. So think about, what if you wanted to change for a very long time and weren't successful in? Was it perfectionism? Was it, this very serious grimness, and you wanted to be more playful? Well, maybe you didn't want to get rid of it because you were afraid of losing your seriousness. And you don't need to. The baby can stay, the bathwater can go, if we have a more nuanced understanding of what it is we want to change. In section next week, you're going to do an exercise with your teaching fellows called sentence completion. In that exercise, this is exactly what you're going to do. You're going to identify, it's an exercise devised by Nathaniel Brandon. You're going to do an exercise that will help you identify what you want to get rid of and what you want to keep. And very often that switch that you make in your mind, subconscious as well as conscious mind, can open the floodwaters, the gates to a new channel, new pathway in our brain, real lasting change. We're going to discuss 3 distinct, though interconnected pathways to change. The ABCs of psychology, which we've mentioned before. The ABCs, the A is the affect, the emotion. The B is the behavior, the action. And C is the cognition, the thought. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each one of the 3. And for each one, we're going to talk about the gradual change approach and the acute change approach. So in a sense, we're building a 3x2. Affect, behavior, cognition times gradual and acute. And we're going to talk about 6 different approaches to change. These 6 approaches to change are interconnected. It's important to connect them. And ideally, we want all three. Why? Quote that I've used a few times and will use again. John Dryden, British poet. We first make our habits, and then our habits make us. In order to change habit, in order to bring about lasting change, we need to have as much of a solid approach, as much force in the intervention. It's not just enough to focus on emotions, not just enough to focus on action. It's not enough just to focus on our thinking. We want to focus on the three, the A, the B, and the C. Think about it. It's like habit can be looked at as a flood. There is a flood in our mind of certain neurons firing in a certain neural pathway. And what we want to do is to overcome this flood. And to overcome this flood, we need as much force as we can. Therefore, we want to use as many approaches as we can. Before we jump into the A, one more thing. What do we want to change? What can we change? And what can we not change? So according to researchers led by the likes of Sonia Lyubomirsky, Ed Diner, happiness comprises, or to explain an individual's happiness, we need to look at three factors. The first factor is the genetic set range. It's not a genetic set point, it's a range. We're all born with certain predisposition toward happiness and well-being. Some people are born with, the smiley face, with the smiley spoon in their mouth. Others, less so. And we're all somewhere on this, bell curve. Some people luckier than others. As I've mentioned a couple of times before, I wasn't born that lucky. I was born more on the anxious side of this curve, not with this happiness spoon in my mouth. Which, by the way, I think helps me teach this class. Because I do these things, I apply these things, I make a difference in my life. Been there, done that, doing it. I can speak from personal experiences, as you know. Now, some people may look at it and say, that's terrible that we have a genetic set range. Well, my answer to that is, it's not good, it's not bad. It is. The law of gravity is not good, it's not bad. It is. And nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed. We need to look at our nature, understand it, and then make the best of it. About 50% of our levels of well-being, of the variance in explaining happiness, can be accounted for by genes. Which explains some of the results of, for example, the twin studies, why there were such similarities among the twins, even if they were, or between the twins, even if they were reared apart. Because genes matter. Not good, not bad, it is. They matter. 50%, not 100%, thank God, but 50% of the variance. The important thing to keep in mind is that we have a lot of control what we do with these genes. One could argue that success, and I'm just throwing out numbers, I don't know what it is exactly, but success of basketball players is determined 50% by genes in terms of how much fast twitch versus slow twitch they have in their muscles, how high they can jump, how coordinated they are, how tall they are. All these things matter. They go into and these are determined by genes. However, if Michael Jordan hadn't worked on his basketball, I would be a better player than he is. If he didn't work on his basketball at all. And I did and do. In other words, also with genes, people who don't work on their happiness, even if they have the best of genes, will not do as well as people with less happy genes who work on it. So work matters a great deal. The second thing that matters, that makes up the 100% of variance of happiness, external circumstances. Of course, extreme circumstances make a lot of difference, whether we're living in a free country versus oppression. That makes a lot of difference. However, in general, external circumstances beyond the extremes, beyond being homeless on the street, make very little difference. In fact, about 10% of the total variance. So, genetic genes, 50%, external circumstances such as place of residence, such as income, such as weather. And again, not for people, for example, who have seasonal affective disorder. Then of course it matters whether we get sun or not. But I'm talking about most people, not people with SAD. So, out of these extremes, the external circumstances matter about 10%. Not much. The third thing, the rest of the 40%, is accounted for by intentional activities. What that means is what we do, how we act, what we think about, how we interpret the world, what we focus on. In essence, what 1504 is about. What we've discussed since the first class, what we're going to discuss even more in the second half of the semester. These intentional activities, our focus, these are essentially our ABCs. This is where real, meaningful change comes. And this is where we're going to focus. Would be nice if we could do something with our genes. Would be nice. Cannot. Would be nice if we had more control of our external circumstances. But even if we did, and many people do, many people sitting in this room or watching at home do have more control, doesn't make that much of a difference. What makes the most difference that we have control over are the intentional activities, our interpretation of the world and our action. So let's jump into it. The A, affect, emotion, the heart. There's a connection between, an etymological connection, linguistic connection between emotion, motivation, motion. Emotion, to move away. Without emotion, we wouldn't move. You've read about it in the book, or you will read about it in the book about Eliot, the person who Damasio researched, who just lost his emotional faculty, and with it lost all motivation to act or do anything, even though his cognition was in place. We need emotion in order to move. So I want to talk about, again, two aspects within emotion. The first, gradual change. The second, more acute change. Gradual change is mindful meditation. Mindful meditation is arguably the most powerful intervention for bringing about calm and equanimity. A lot of research on it. We're going to spend a whole week talking about it. Today what I want to do is just introduce it, the basic, the foundation of the spiral of mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn, who in many ways is responsible for bringing serious research into this realm, he, along with people like Tara Bennett-Goldman, people like Herbert Benson from the medical school here, brought serious research to this, what was considered a mystical field. Cultivating mindfulness can lead to the discovery of deep realms of relaxation, calmness, and insight within yourself. The path to it in any moment lies no further than your own body and mind and your own. This is the amazing thing about mindfulness. The results that you'll see that I'll talk about when we talk about research, quite literally mind-boggling. I mean, they change the way our mind works, transform our brain. Just by focusing on the breath, by focusing on parts of our body, by being present. All of us have the capacity to be mindful. All it involves is cultivating our ability to pay attention in the present moment. Let's experience it just for a minute. So here's what I'd like you to do. Once again, if you feel comfortable with it. So sit back on your chair with your back against the backrest. Make yourself as comfortable as you can. Plant feet on the ground comfortably. And if you feel comfortable, just close your eyes. And move your attention to your breathing. Take a deep breath in, into your belly. And slow, quiet, gentle exhalation. Deep, slow inhalation to your belly. Slow, gentle, quiet, long exhalation. If your mind wanders, Just return to your breathing. Now, in your mind's eye, just scan your body, your forehead, your eyes, your nose, mouth, your neck, your chest, your upper back, lower back, your legs, all the way down to your feet. Just scan your body while continuing to breathe deeply, slowly, and gently. And through your scan, find a part of your body that is a little bit more tense than the others. It could be your jaws. It could be your neck. It could be your shoulders, your stomach, where you're feeling a little bit of disease. It could be your legs, your knees, your feet. Identify that one part of the body that is a little bit more tense than the others, and focus on it, and continue to breathe. Take a deep breath into that part of your body, and when you let go, when you exhale, also let go of the tension that's there. Just relax it. And take a few deep breaths into that part of your body and relax it. Go. Return your focus to your breathing. Take a deep breath in, and slow, gentle, quiet, long exhale, relaxing with the exhalation. Deep breathing in, deep, slow, gentle, long exhaling. And at the end of the next exhalation, gently, slowly, quietly open your eyes. Once again, if the person next to you is asleep, just gently wake them up. Tara Bennett Goldman. If someone is speaking in their sleep, please wake them up. Tara Bennett Goldman, in her book Emotional Alchemy. Mindfulness means seeing things as they are, without trying to change them. The point is to dissolve reactions to disturbing emotions, being careful not to reject the emotion itself. This is what permission to be is all about. Allowing the emotion, experiencing the emotion, and just breathing through it. And very often, when we do that, always, but very often, it dissolves. And with it, with the emotional dissolution of the emotion, comes also the psychological dissolution of this painful emotion. Again, we'll talk much more about this very important intervention after spring break. This is about gradual change. What we'll see when we talk about research is that even if this is gradual change, within as little as 8 weeks of regular meditation, our brain actually starts to change its form, to transform. Our immune system strengthens after as little as 8 weeks of regular daily meditation. And it doesn't have to be 5 hours a day, as little as 30 minutes or 20 minutes a day can already affect change. This is gradual, slow. Hopefully something that you will take up as a lifelong intervention. Here is an example of more acute change when it comes to our emotion. So when I thought about filling in this box in the 3x2 model, how do I find an acute emotional change? Immediately my mind went to research in clinical psychology, specifically to post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, something that has been studied, thousands and thousands of articles, research done in our department too. And when I looked at it, I said, well, this is an example of an acute change, a very acute change, because what happens when we have a trauma, many people after the trauma are changed forever, for the rest of their lives, if they have PTSD. It actually changes the chemicals that flow through our brain. It changes the structure of our brain, creates new neural pathways, kills a lot of old neural pathways as a result of a single experience. It's a sledgehammer. It is very widespread, unfortunately. I mentioned it last time, 30% of Vietnam vets have PTSD. 30%. 8% from the first Gulf War have PTSD. As I mentioned, we don't have the exact data yet from the second Gulf War, but the numbers are likely going to be higher than that. After 9/11, or before 9/11 rather, there were 20,000 individuals with PTSD south of 110th Street, New York. Right after 9/11, 60,000 individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now this has consequences. Again, it has consequences on the way our brain functions very often, not always, but very often for the rest of our lives. So this is an acute change. It comes immediately, one trauma, 9/11, or seeing something terrible in war. And then that often has an effect for the rest of for the entire life. It's a shock treatment, a negative shock treatment. Now when I look at PTSD, and when I thought about it, I asked, okay, so what does positive psychology have to do with this? I mean, this is clinical psychology. This is quote-unquote negative psychology. Well, the answer is a lot. First of all, a lot of research starting only in 1998, again, 10 years ago, the time when positive psychology came onto the scene. Research on post-traumatic growth. And what was found was that, in fact, more people experience growth as a result of a trauma than PTSD. However, we don't talk about post-traumatic growth. Everyone knows about PTSD. But again, this is another example of where the light is not shed on something that is actually working well. And what is working here? Most people are extremely resilient, able to withstand trauma. And that is a very empowering understanding to have. It will become more of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and more people will experience post-traumatic growth if they only knew that it was a possibility, that it was common. If they didn't feel guilty about experiencing growth as a result of trauma.